often think that people have unrealistic expectations of Mr. Kennedy. They criticize him far more harshly than they criticize President Biden or President Trump, both of whom claim to be pro-Israel. But, for some reason, all of their vitriol and their fire and their hatred and their anger is directed at Bobby. And as a historian, I find it troubling because it's like shades of 1968. When I look at this race, I see a lot of things happening in our society that mirror exactly what was going on in 1968, with so much unrest in the streets, so much division politically, and the Middle East situation, which led to the assassination of RFK. Sirhan Sirhan, the man who sits in prison today for 55 years, who was convicted by a jury, confessed to the crime. His appeal was denied. Governor Newsom wouldn't let him out, even when the parole board granted him parole 2 years ago. He said that night in the Ambassador Hotel, I can explain. I did it for my country. I love my country. He did it for Palestine. And he shot 5 other innocent people. Now, Bobby doesn't believe that the bullets from Sirhan's gun were actually the fatal shots that killed his dad. But there can be no doubt that Sirhan, a Palestinian who had good reasons to be radicalized, he was displaced in the Nakba of 1948. His family had to move to Jordan. He lost a brother, his elder brother, Munir, died in that conflict. He was traumatized as a child. That sort of thing will radicalize you from childhood. I'm not defending his assassination of Bobby's father, obviously. I'm just saying he had his reasons for being so radicalized, and he was, fanatically anti-Israel. He had what we call Israel derangement syndrome. Now, in his case, he had a good reason to be. He was actually from there. He had gone through it. He went through the 1948 war. He had his reasons. Today, I sometimes wonder when I look at these Western kids on college campuses out marching in the streets, why are you so concerned about what's happening 5,000 miles away in a conflict that really doesn't involve you, doesn't affect your life? We don't have our soldiers over there. You're not going to fight in that war. There's no danger that you will be, most likely, you will not be dispatched to the Middle East to fight. You see someone like Aaron Bushnell, bless his heart. This kid had the rest of his life ahead of him, and yet he was so distraught over what was going on in Gaza that he self-immolated and wasted the rest of his life. So it's a strange thing that I don't quite understand, but I see a radicalization now of Western kids who are so deeply invested in this Palestine conflict and turning so adamantly against the state of Israel and Zionists and people like Bobby Kennedy, who's a Zionist and supports Israel's right to exist.
Well, it's not really one thing. It's a lot of things. I mean, no one wants any war to begin with. And then the fact that the US was the only one that said no to a ceasefire, that's really what set this off for the younger people.
But the thing is, both Israel and Hamas, they said no to the ceasefire. Again, the United Nations can't force it on them if they don't want it. If they don't want to stop shooting, they're not going to stop shooting.
But the fact that the United States was the only one who didn't vote for it is just, it goes against what you say, that the president only has so much, we have nothing to do with that. Well, when you had the United States that is the only country that voted no, like that is just like a slap in the face. Now, I think Kennedy gets criticized about the issue more than everyone else because a lot of people expect more from him than everyone else. Because everything, if you go on TikTok, the only thing people do right now is look at who gets money from AIPAC. So almost all of our politicians are bought and paid for by AIPAC.
Kennedy's not. But he hasn't taken a penny from AIPAC.
I know. And that's the thing. Kennedy is not. So we expect more from him because people want him because we don't want the same old, same old. If we wanted someone that was bought and paid for by AIPAC, people would just vote for Biden. I don't know if Trump accepts it, but So we just expect more from him. And again, I don't think that there's anything wrong with saying just innocent life should not be lost, just plain and simple. So it's just a cumulative thing. It's not just one thing. It's just a lot of things that it's like, how could the US say no? Even if they decide to not listen to the ceasefire, it doesn't matter. It's just like, how are they the only ones? But I don't want to take up the rest of the time. You guys have had, I think, Kyle, I feel like you've had your hand up like forever. So I'm really sorry. So I'm going to let someone else go.
I just want to point out, for what it's worth, before moving on, that Sirhan Sirhan was actually one of Robert Kennedy's biggest supporters. He was in love with Robert Kennedy until he found out his position on Israel. And after that, he started stalking him. He started writing in his notebooks. 1,000 times he wrote the words, RFK must die. RFK must die. And he showed up at the Ambassador Hotel that night with a gun in his hand. And whether you believe that he shot Senator Kennedy and killed him or not, he was shooting at Senator Kennedy. And in interview after interview, and in his own court testimony, he made it abundantly clear that he loved Robert Kennedy, but he felt that Robert Kennedy had to die because of his position on Israel. And today, as a volunteer on this campaign, I see hundreds of comments a day since October 7th of people who hate Kennedy. They used to love him until October 7th. And now they're so radicalized, so fanatic, that they wish him harm. I've seen the death threats, people. I've seen our list of requests to the Secret Service get longer and longer since October the 7th. There are fanatics out there, my friends, and somebody out there wants to be the next Sirhan Sirhan, and they want to martyr themselves and or Mr. Kennedy over this issue, over a war where we don't have any American troops involved in combat. It's 5,000 miles away, and it's not our war. And we need to protect Mr. Kennedy in the absence of Secret Service protection. And I'm going to ask everyone in this space, everyone who cares, whether you agree or disagree with Mr. Kennedy on the topic of Gaza, to do all that you can to keep him safe, to keep his family safe. I'm making a personal plea that anytime you see a death threat online, report it. Report it to Twitter, report it to the social media platform, and forward it to security in the Kennedy campaign. If you don't know how to do that, contact me and I'll get it to them. But these shouldn't be taken lightly, and we shouldn't forget how his father died and why his father died and why Sirhan Sirhan showed up that night with a gun, my friends. So that being said, let me go to Kyle. I'm sorry, I got a little emotional there. I heard Anna call your name. Kyle, you're next. Go ahead.
Thank you, Lori. Thanks for this hosting the space. I guess I first want to say something about the situation in the Middle East, and it's just a simple plea or hope that we turn to prayer, because we do have our voice and we can speak out about how we feel, but I think that we need a spiritual force to be brought to bear on this. That there needs to be a call for a higher power to intervene, and because there's been this is generational. This is multi-generational trauma we're all suffering from right now, just having the discussion. And I believe in the power of prayer, so that the whole truth be revealed, whatever that is, because the truth will set us all free eventually. And with prayer, we can perhaps speed that along. The other thing I wanted to say about that is I read a book in college called Pedagogy of the Oppressed. I went to Evergreen State College in Olympia, Washington. So kind of a lefty liberal experiment in higher education, but it was a great education because, well, anyway, that's another subject. So in Pedagogy of the Oppressed, Pablo Freire is the author. He's a Brazilian, and what he observed, and this is repeated over and over again, both in interpersonal dynamics, but also on a planetary or political national scale, is that those who are oppressed very often will become the oppressor after they are freed, and that they very often are worse oppressors than those that have oppressed them. And I'll just leave it there. And I think you have that going on in the Middle East. In terms of Sirhan, and then I'll have a few words about, I watched the whole event yesterday about Nicole Shanahan, but I happen to know the lawyer for Sirhan Sirhan, Dr. William Pepper. I consider him a friend. And I also had a chance when I was making my film about 9/11 in New York City. And his name has escaped me because I hadn't been in touch with him for years, but he was the NBC producer following Bobby Kennedy's campaign for presidency. So he had a team with him, and he was in the room, and he had a team recording the whole thing. And there were two recordings that survived that event, and this is one of the reasons why Bobby has made the determination that Sirhan's bullet didn't kill. That there were 8 or 9 bullets recorded on the two separate recordings, so they corroborated each other in terms of evidence. And it could not have possibly been Sirhan because the autopsy found that the bullet came from behind, and it was his bodyguard that had pulled the gun and was directly behind Bobby Kennedy. So the kill shot came from point blank range behind him.
You know, that recording you're talking about is called the Brzezinski recording, after the name of the reporter, who was actually, I believe, a radio reporter, had a audio tape recorder, not video. Right. And he recorded the sound of the gunshots in the pantry. And that tape, I'm the person who gave that tape to Bobby Kennedy, actually, like 17 years ago.
Oh,
wow. Through Paul Schrade, who was a friend of RFK Sr. He was shot that night in the pantry, took a bullet to the head, made a full recovery, thank goodness. And Paul just died last year at the age of 97. He was a very close friend of mine. And it was Paul who got the Brzezinski recording to me and said, hey, can you get this to Bobby Kennedy? Because at that time I was working on a draft Kennedy campaign trying to get Bobby to run for president in 2008. But that's a whole other story. So I got the tape to Bobby, and at the time, I got to be honest and tell you that he wasn't ready to hear it. He didn't want to look at the autopsy yet. It was too personal for him, and he just wasn't ready at that time in his life to confront that. It took several years until he sat down with Paul Schrade, and Paul got him to look at that evidence and listen to the Brzezinski recording and look at the analysis that's been done. And the Brzezinski recording is kind of controversial in the RFK assassination research community. You know, there were some scientists who analyzed it, said they found up to 13 gunshot sounds on the tape, but others have analyzed it in more recent years with better technology, and they say that it wasn't 13, that they isolated 8. So it's still, I don't know, it's still a mystery even after 55 years what actually happened that night.
I think there was a second audio tape, and it may have been my NBC News veteran reporter, producer who was there. So I think the second tape corroborated the first finding of 13. But I'm not a researcher. I just happened to meet and become friends with these two people who were very close to Sirhan, or very close to the event, the assassination. The other thing that came out when I spent the night at the NBC producer's apartment in New York City one night, and he tossed a script onto the bed where I was sleeping in his guest room, and he said, "Have a look at this." And he then described an encounter, the FBI in the middle of the night basically knocked down his door, and they were coming to him because he had something they wanted, and that was anything having to do with what happened in the pantry that afternoon, and apparently, including the script, he was the only one-on-one interview with Sirhan. He conducted the only
What's
interview.
the reporter's name?
And
What's the NBC reporter's name?
I'm sorry, I'm going to have to try to find that for you, Lori, but he gave me a copy of this thing that had been sitting in his den or whatever on a bookshelf for what, 40, 50 years or what have you. And he shared it with me, and I read through it, and I don't agree with your the assumption you made. I don't think he was acting of his own volition. And I think most of the people on this call are aware of MK Ultra and hypnosis, the power of hypnosis, and the classic film Manchurian Candidate, who's been remade. And it's clear that the CIA has this capacity to develop this capacity to program people, and there were indications, and he himself says he's no recollection whatsoever of pulling the trigger or anything. And I'm not interested in what he said afterwards because he's intimidated or whatever. But I believe he was an MK Ultra victim, chosen for specific reasons, the obvious ones that you stated, and that he didn't have any memory because he was on automatic, just like he was on automatic when he wrote that 1,000 times or 150 times, whatever. I want. You said the words, whatever he said about killing Kennedy. And there was a woman in the polka dot dress, right, who was seen leaving the pantry or the back door of the kitchen, going out the back, and there was a maid who was there who heard someone say, "We killed Kennedy." And there was a woman with a polka dot dress who's probably some kind of handler. So I was able to get that script, that transcript, to Dr. William Pepper, who was Sirhan's attorney, and make it part of his, just so he had it. So it was corroborating evidence for whatever he was looking at, to getting Sirhan out of prison. So I just thought that I should share that because I had a personal connection to that. I do not believe he was there of his own volition. I believe he was a tool of MK Ultra and the CIA.
I've been fascinated by this case, Kyle. I mean, fascinated. I started studying it in 1986 or so. And I remember in 1988 when California finally opened up the files. And a lot of that was because of the efforts of my friend Paul Schrade, who lobbied to get that done. And I've been studying the case files literally for more than 35 years. And I've changed my mind on the case many times. I used to believe the official version of events, that Sirhan was guilty. Then I saw the autopsy and I heard the Brzezinski recording, and I talked to Paul Schrade, and I started to think, well, maybe there is a conspiracy here. And I started looking into Thane Eugene Caesar and, the security guard that night. And I've gone back and forth on it through the years. And I've come back and, recently sort of come back. I did a review. Here's why I changed my mind and came back to my belief originally that, yes, Sirhan is guilty and that he did it. On the 55th anniversary of his trial, which was in January of this year, I went back and I re-reviewed documents that I hadn't looked at in 35 years. I totally did a thorough review of the trial transcripts, his testimony, interviews that he gave to others, interviews with other witnesses, case documents, press clippings from reporters who covered his trial. And I changed my mind yet again and came to the conclusion that, yeah, he could have done it. It's very possible that he did it. And anyway, I did like a whole podcast. It's like an hour-long, in-depth investigative report exploring the case as it was presented in court for both the prosecution and the defense, including new evidence that's come out in the 55 years since that wasn't included in the original trial. And anybody out there who's interested in the RFK case might want to check it out. I just put a link to that up in the nest. It's a video, a podcast that you can watch and listen to. You'll see original case documents that you might not have seen before. And it's very, very, very interesting, especially in light of the Israel-Palestine conflict and the Gaza war right now. So check that out if you get a chance. And, you know, since we were talking about the RFK assassination earlier, and the reason that Sirhan Sirhan, after being denied parole 17 times, the California Parole Board finally did grant him parole. And the reason that they did so was again, this gets back to woke criminal justice. The law in California was changed a couple of years before that. Sirhan comes up for parole, I think, every 5 years. And because of the change in the law, for the first time, the parole board had to consider things such as childhood trauma, which is something they'd never looked at before. And that's the reason that Sirhan technically qualified for parole, was his advanced age, whether or not he was a threat to society, whether he might offend again. But also they took into consideration for the first time his childhood traumas that he suffered in Palestine. And that's why he technically qualified. But then Governor Newsom, you know, he had to make the final decision. You know, the parole board makes a recommendation and then the governor has to sign off on it or not. And ultimately, Governor Newsom decided to keep Sirhan locked up. And the reason he made that decision was he went up to Sacramento, where the California State Archives are, and he did the same thing that I just did back in January when I was producing this in-depth investigation about his trial. He went and reviewed the actual documents. He went and reviewed the evidence in the California State Archives. And he came away with it understanding that to this day, Sirhan Sirhan has never taken full responsibility or even acknowledged the act. He likes to be a martyr for Palestine. He cozied up to that. He liked that he did something for his people and that he was recognized in the Middle East as a hero, as a martyr, as someone who advanced the cause of Arab nationalism here in the United States. That was the first time that Palestinian terrorism struck on American shores. And it set off this whole, you know, after that, if you lived through the 70s, you remember, and 80s too, when, you know, airliners were being hijacked all the time by Palestinian hijackers. They were, you know, terrorist groups who would just take these airliners and all of the passengers hostage and then blow up the planes on the tarmac. You know, they did that in Cairo. They did that in Amman, Jordan in 1970 and 1972. Some of you may know this story. Bobby Kennedy Jr.'s brother, Joseph, his older brother, was on a plane, a Lufthansa plane that was, I think he was headed for, I forget, I think he was in Greece. I forget where his destination was. It was hijacked. It was diverted to Yemen, and he was taken hostage. And it's, you know, the hijackers in all of these cases, the Palestinians demanded the release of Sirhan Sirhan from prison. And of course, in every case, President Nixon said, I'm not negotiating with terrorists, and always denied that request. President Nixon constitutionally, I don't think even had the power to release Sirhan. That was a state crime. So that would have fallen to Governor Ronald Reagan to make that decision at the time. But it's an interesting story. And in at least 3 cases that I know of in hijackings and terrorism in the 70s, the hijackers' demands, of course, were always the release of Sirhan Sirhan. He's considered a hero over there. And if he ever does get released, because he's not a U.S. citizen, they will deport him back to Palestine or Jordan. And he will receive a hero's welcome, most likely. So I had a question for you, Billy Dees, before I let you go. Do you think that Sirhan Sirhan should be freed? Do you think he should be released?
I understand the argument about he's of a certain age where he's not a threat. And I know there's a tendency to go down that path, and I understand it. However, I would like to point out that the taking anyone's life is, of course, the worst possible crime you can commit. When you assassinate someone like a JFK or an RFK, Martin Luther King, any of these types of individuals, you not only kill a human being, but you blow a hole through history. You kill what if. And these people who have put the United States in a trajectory that is completely different, I think my own opinion is that's all the more reason to leave them where they're at. You could make the comment that the world might be a better place. Certainly, if John F. Kennedy had served out his terms in regard to Vietnam, everything that happened in civil rights, you could go on. You could go down a long path, and Bobby the same way. These people changed the lives of millions of people by doing what they did. And I'm just not a big fan of saying, okay, well, you're an old bugger now. Yeah, so we'll let you go, slap you on the back. I hope you have, live out the rest of your life, whatever it is, in peace. I don't have that kind of feeling towards somebody who has blown a hole through history. It's not there for me. So I don't know if that answers your question
Right.
or not, but there it is.
Yeah, it's an emotional response for sure. I mean, I'm angry that they let John Hinckley out.
Yes,
John Hinckley, who tried to assassinate President Reagan, is walking around free now.
absolutely.
But yet they'll never, ever let Mark David Chapman out, the guy who shot John Lennon.
Yeah.
Because it's so emotional, because John Lennon was such a hero to so many, it's just one of those things like, never. You killed my hero. We're never letting you out. And that's how a lot of people feel about Robert Kennedy, including Governor Newsom. He admits that, he's a big fan of Robert Kennedy. Robert Kennedy was his hero when he was a kid. And, he looks at Sirhan as the guy who killed his hero.
Yes, that is
hard to let that guy out.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. And here again, though, but on a practical level, you can't argue that these people have affected the trajectory of the history of the United States, which encompasses not only people here in the United States but worldwide. Vietnam is a classic example of that. So the last thing that I would want too is people to be encouraged that they are going to become a historical figure by taking this kind of action. I'm not one to forgive and forget when it comes to the assassinations. Assassinations is probably on a very short list of things that I can never forgive. So I hope that answers your question.
Great answer. Great answer. And I also want to ask Citizen. Citizen's had his hand up for a while. You've probably got another point that you'd like to make, but I'm just going to pose the question to you also. Do you think that Sirhan Sirhan should stay in prison or should he be free?
To be honest, I don't really have an opinion. I've only heard stories similar to what you guys are talking about. I don't have enough information to say one way or another. Not deep level research on it.
Well, I hope you'll take an hour to watch my investigative report. That'll teach you a lot about the case.
I would be happy to, actually. It's something that I've been interested in and just haven't had the time to really dive in based on my own priorities with research. So yeah, I would be happy to look into that and watch your
link to it down in the purple pill, so you can check it out.
Okay, I'll be sure to bookmark it and check it out.
LTH68, talk to me, my friend.
Hey, Lori, how's it going? Can you hear me?
Yeah, loud and clear. Hello, welcome to the panel.
Thank you. First of all, I just want to thank you for your dedication. You are so dedicated, and I so admire you for that. And thank you for your hard work.
Thank you so much, my friend.
I've done a lot. I was a proponent. I mean, I was against RFK's stance of Israel, and I thought about it for a long time, because I just can't stand war. I'm just totally anti-war. And the conclusion that I kind of came to was that I I really believe in who RFK Jr. is as a person, through the things that he's gone through in his life, especially the heroin addiction, believe it or not, because I believe that it's like you get stronger by the things that you go through in life, and to see his journey in that situation and everything that he's been through, and to come out where he is right now, made me think that he basically he's just a good person, and he's honest, and he's strong, and so I don't know everything that's going on in Israel. The only thing I know is what I read or what somebody told me. It's a conflict that has been going on for years and years and years, and nobody seems to be able to figure it out. And so the conclusion that I came to was that he's going to figure it out, because I trust who he is. And some people might think that's naive. I don't know, but I'm a great judge of character, and I love his character, and so that's kind of where I went on that issue. Now, as far as like Shanahan, same thing. I don't know much about her. I look at her and I have some concerns. It's like I like the fact that she's into technology. I'm not buying into this thing about her and Elon Musk. That is insignificant to me. But it goes back to Bobby again. It's like I trust him. And so if that's who he thinks is going to make a good vice president, then I'm going to kind of go along with that, and I'm going to research it as I go along, as I learn who she is and stuff like that. But my concerns with her is basically, does she have the experience to be vice president? I mean, what's going to happen when the CIA starts putting pressure on her, when she has to deal with the establishment and all the things that Bobby's been dealing with for God knows how long now, and does she have the character to be able to deal with that? And because she's kind of an unproven person to me, and so that's what my concern about it is. But then again, I trust Bobby, so it's like I'm just going to stand back and watch and see what happens, and go from there, because I don't know, and I'll just keep researching and what have you. I would have much rather him pick Jesse Ventura or somebody who's battle proven, but that didn't happen. So,
oh man, I was bummed about that. I was bummed about that.
I know you were bummed about that. I know, and when he picked, I know how you felt about the Jets quarterback, because we had that discussion. But when he picked Shanahan, I was thinking to myself, what's Lori thinking about this? And
took me a minute to kind of process that one. I'm not going to lie.
Yeah, I kind of figured it would. But even like with Tulsi, it's like who Tulsi is. Might not agree with everything that she does. Disappointed in the fact that she's like trying to hook up with Trump. But we'll see who Nicole is. It's smart in the fact that she's a millennial, and we need new blood in there. But is she proven? Somebody talk to me about that, because I don't know anything about whether she's proven. It's like I'm working 60 hours a week, so how much time do I got to research Nicole Shannon? All I hear is what I read in the time that I have to put into it, which I appreciate, again, you, Lori, because of, you're part of the people who I research, I read your stuff, so Anyway,
I'm
so that's
trying to
all I
keep
have.
you informed. That's what I do. I try to keep people informed, not just about the news of the day, but about the Kennedy campaign in particular. I try to keep people up to date on what he's saying this week, what his latest interviews are, what his positions on the issues are. And it's a lot to keep up with. So I appreciate that you listen, that you check out the show.
Yeah, and so that's how I kind of feel about it. And I really do trust Kennedy. I mean, I really do think I have a good. I understand him. I feel like and the things that he's gone through and through his life, and I think that's an important thing that people should consider. And so anyway, that's all I got to say. Thank you for letting me speak.
My pleasure, hon. And, trust has to be earned. And Bobby believes that. He's working so hard at trying to earn the people's trust and earn each and every vote that he's getting out there. And if he loses a vote, right, and maybe he's lost some votes or lost some support with his position on the war, like I said to Pasta earlier, we're going to win you back. Bobby's going to earn your trust and your respect and your vote back if you'll just hear him out. Let me tell you something that I do know about Bobby Kennedy. I can't claim to be really close to Bobby Kennedy. I would never say that. But I spent enough time around him 17 years ago that I got a pretty good feel for the guy. And what he does is he's got a lot of curveballs. And yesterday was one of those classic Kennedy curveballs. He's always doing the thing you don't quite expect, right? Just like when he came out in support of Israel so strongly. A lot of people certainly on the left were not expecting that. They just assumed that he would automatically support Palestine because that's the trendy lefty thing to do. But he didn't. And that takes a minute to process. When I was trying to get him to look at the evidence of his own father's murder all those years ago, to listen to the Brzezinski recording, to look at the autopsy report, and he didn't want to talk about it, that was a curveball too. I wasn't ready for that. He's always doing some things that might surprise you, just like, a lot of people want him to be more aggressive on the Green New Deal and climate change, and he doesn't go there. He's not a climate alarmist. He's more conservative on a lot of things. He will surprise you. He will often take a position or do a thing that you're not quite ready for. And today, everyone's, especially our supporters on the libertarian side and to the right, and the Republicans and the conservatives who supported Kennedy, the former DeSantis voters and Ramaswamy voters and Trump voters who were in our movement, are shaky after yesterday. They weren't real comfortable with Nicole Shanahan because they perceive her to be some crazy commie leftist from California and, Silicon Valley. And I think that they need to listen to her speech, get to know her, hear her out, because believe me, when Bobby makes a decision, it's well thought out. It's deliberate. He has thought about this for a long time. He's thoroughly vetted this woman and feels comfortable with her. After hearing her speak yesterday, I feel a lot more comfortable with her. I don't want to sound like a fangirl and say I fell in love with her, but she really did impress me yesterday, and I can see why Bobby picked her. In a way, I felt like a star was born. I think she's the most interesting young female politician. I guess she's a politician now, right? I mean, when you're running for vice president, yeah, you're automatically a politician. So now she's a politician. And I think that a new Tulsi Gabbard was born yesterday. She's the most exciting thing that I've seen since Tulsi first came on the scene. So all I ask is, for people who aren't quite sure what to make of Bobby sometimes, when he does the unexpected thing, the thing you weren't expecting him to do, that's what believe me, I was there all those years ago when he was just known as an environmental lawyer. And all of a sudden he got into the vaccine safety movement back in like 2005, 2006. I remember the response to that. People they didn't know what to make of it. Just like they didn't know what to make of him endorsing Hillary Clinton in the 2008 race when she was so unpopular and Obama was so popular and half the Kennedys supported Obama. Half of this family was divided on that election too. I will remind people this isn't the first time that the Kennedys have been divided politically. They had quite a battle back in 2008 during the primaries when Hillary Clinton was running against Barack Obama, and Bobby was in Hillary's camp. They were longtime friends, and he supported her up until the convention. And then after that, of course, he fell in line and endorsed Obama. Probably regrets that now. I wonder. He was out campaigning for Obama, actually. I'm going to go to Independent Zoomer because you've had your hand up for quite a while until it falls off. Hello, welcome to the space. Tell me what you think of Nicole Shanahan, my friend.
Hey, Lori. Thanks for bringing me on the stage and hosting this Twitter space. So yeah, first thoughts of seeing Nicole Shanahan. I pretty much ignored what I saw in the chat. I thought that she was pretty genuine, pretty authentic when she was talking about her upbringing and all of that, and especially when the video was playing. Having an autistic child. Her background. Starting a company and being self-made. And so many people are trying to say she's far left and all of that, but obviously she's supportive of capitalism. If she's gone from the bottom up, she's also she comes from her one of her parents are immigrants from China, and I imagine they probably left China because of the different issues in that country. So she's definitely someone that probably has always tried to be on the right side of things. And I think especially seeing her emotional and all of that, she's definitely genuine. I listened to her podcast earlier talking about certain things. It does seem like so far she's anti-war, so she's probably against Ukraine funding. We don't need to be sending billions there. She's on the same page when it comes to vaccines, not necessarily anti-vax, but she, does support thoroughly holding like the CDC accountable and Pfizer, and not just them having a rushed vaccine that's made, within only a few months, causing cancer and all types of, crazy effects. But yeah, so overall, I think that she's a very positive contribution to the campaign. And, he ultimately picked her because, she was young. She can appeal, to some of the younger voters and some of the more left-leaning voters. But when it comes to a few concerns and rumors and such, yeah, there are a few. Obviously, we know that MAGA and many Trump supporters, they just completely let it off on her, and of course, they disregard everything with Trump and all the things that he's done, Operation Warp Speed, etc. But I think there are other people, not just Trump supporters. There are people that generally were independents, or some of the DeSantis people, the more right-leaning people that really wanted to vote for Kennedy. They were somewhat discouraged, and I think many people are saying, well, how come? Well, both Nicole and Tulsi, they're both former Democrats. They both left the party. How come people are more favorable towards one than the other? Why aren't they giving Nicole the same sort of favorability that they're giving Tulsi? But I think one of the main reasons is that obviously many people weren't really familiar with Nicole. Many people saw Tulsi's transition from point A, basically an establishment Democrat, to a Democrat that was more curious, more open-minded, to someone that was literally calling out the DNC, to someone that ultimately left the party. People saw the whole transition. People haven't seen that with Nicole, and I think that's one of the reasons they're jumping to conclusions. But I do think, there are other genuine concerns. Here's the deal. She declared her independence yesterday. She unequivocally said that she left the Democratic Party. It's clear she didn't go into specifics on everything that she disagreed with them with, but she made it clear, especially with vaccines and being anti-war, she's no longer supportive of their party. Obviously, we have to see all of her positions. When it comes to people's concerns, there's a legitimate concern. Obviously, they're worried about possible connection, to the World Economic Forum. People she's donated, I think I don't know if it was Attorney General or whatever the position was, some guy, and that was related to law enforcement in California, that basically is basically supportive of allowing criminals just to get instant release. There are and here's the deal. Most likely she had a good intention, right? Her being a Democrat, her, donating to certain candidates like Biden or Buttigieg, she probably had, the best intentions in mind. Keep in mind that a lot of, Democrat, not just voters, but even some people that donate, they aren't really aware. And obviously both parties are, the duopoly, equally corrupt, but specifically the Democratic Party, yeah, they are pretty complicit in globalism, Agenda 2030, all of this stuff that's really about to go down, And she probably wasn't aware of a lot of those things. She probably wasn't aware of, Soros, the World Economic Forum, the fact that, because here's the deal. The World Economic Forum, a lot of the people that criticize her, they don't realize this. They manipulate a lot of people. They get legitimate causes, whether it be legitimate concerns about the climate, legitimate concerns. There are concerns about criminal justice reform, and especially I believe, like, when it comes to marijuana, there are a lot of unjust cases, but they exploit people's emotion and use that as an excuse, to usher in their agenda, right? This defunding the police is basically a ploy to help Soros and many people in the World Economic Forum have control. Basically, usher in a police state like what we're seeing in New York with the National Guard. There are issues with the climate. Bobby, RFK is someone that fought, for a lot of environmental issues, but that's being exploited. And like he said, they're giving climate a bad rep by basically, people like Bill Gates saying that, oh, farming is bad for the environment, and they should ban farming, and eating meat is bad, and you should consume insects. I mean, this stuff is crazy.
Yeah.
And I don't
Meanwhile,
think
I just want to say Bill Gates is buying up farmland like it's going out of style.
exactly.
I'm in Oklahoma, and he's buying up tons of our farmland here. I don't know what the hell he's
Exactly.
doing with it all, but
Exactly. And these people are hypocrites, right? They push a lot of, like, they're against, not crony, but they're against legitimate capitalism, people working their way up from the bottom to the top, by saying things like equity. Meanwhile, they're billionaires themselves, right? But they want to stop, and increase taxes and stuff. So they're ultimately hypocrites. And I just think it's important to realize obviously both parties, bought off by globalists and all of that. And there are many problems with the Republican Party, but a lot of Democrat voters, they don't, realize, what they're supporting. And many Trump supporters, they don't realize, that, he called Klaus Schwab a good man. He's pushed Operation Warp Speed, 15-minute cities. And another thing too is all the people that are criticizing Nicole Shanahan, for her donations. Trump donated to Hillary. He donated to many Democratic politicians, right?
true.
They ignore that. I mean,
That's right.
it's just crazy. But I think that as long as she does need to be clear, it does need to be more than just, okay, I opened my eyes to the Democratic Party, I'm independent now. She does need to unequivocally denounce the World Economic Forum, denounce globalism. She can, if she still has certain views when it comes to criminal justice reform and climate and real issues, that's fine. But she needs to, acknowledge that she realizes that, she doesn't support globalism and how they're trying to use and manipulate issues for their agenda, and that she wouldn't go to Davos, she wouldn't participate in Agenda 2030. And in general, she needs to make it, very clear also in specific other issues aside from that, the border, you know, Ukraine funding. I know she's anti-war. She's probably against that, but we need to hear about that. Biological men being in women's sports. Those are issues that, even if she is more left-leaning, there are people on the left like Jimmy Dore. He's a progressive and he's very reasonable. Many conservatives like him. So I think that it's a top priority. I think Anna mentioned this earlier. The campaign, they need to she needs to get on podcasts. She needs to get on Joe Rogan. I do think I've seen earlier someone said, well, Kennedy could be the person that appeals more to the right and she could be the one that appeals more to the left. I think they need to appeal to both sides, both of them. And I think Kennedy already does a good job with both, but she needs to appeal to both too. And I think she, naturally appealing to Gen Z people on the left, that's going to be easy. They need to get the hard part out the way. I think she needs to be on, Newsmax, more right-leaning podcasts and stuff. And she needs to basically be, like Tulsi Gabbard 2.0. She needs to, obviously the duopoly, both parties are equally bad pretty much. But she does need to focus for the next month or so, the next 2 months. They need to crush this whole narrative that she's very far left. She needs to call out the left unequivocally, call out globalism, call out all of these agendas. And I feel like if she does that, the campaign can get the conservative support and the former DeSantis supporters. They can get all of them back. That's what I think.
That's a great idea. I mean, she needs to do media on both the right and the left. I want to see her do
Yeah.
Fox News. I want to see her do Joe Rogan. And I want to see her do the Jimmy Dore show. And I want to see her do the Pasta to Go shows. Pasta's still in the audience listening. Pasta, you should get Nicole Shanahan on your show. And get her on the Jimmy Dore show for a good grilling. I'm sure Jimmy will, have some tough questions for her.
Oh yeah.
I want to hear her really flush out her positions on the issues. And I know that we're all eager to hear a lot more after yesterday. But I do want to sort of reset the space now that we're coming up close to the top of the hour. I think I'm going to I'll go about another hour or so. Some of you will be listening to this on other platforms later of the Kennedy Americans podcast. Tonight we're talking about Nicole Shanahan, Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s vice presidential running mate, who was announced Tuesday out in Oakland, California, hometown of Kamala Harris. And I just think it's delicious that he picked a running mate who is literally from the vice president's hometown, who's also a lifelong Democrat, a beautiful, young, strong, smart, educated, successful, ethnic minority woman who came up from poverty and made the American dream come true. Also a great lawyer. You know, Kamala Harris always loves to tell you what a great lawyer she is. I can't wait for the debates, you guys. The vice presidential debates are going to be fire. I want to see those two ladies go at it, because if it's a battle of the wits, I think Shanahan's going to win. I'm just saying. And, you know, I ran a poll today. I wanted to ask Kennedy supporters and the voters in general their thoughts on the Kennedy Shanahan ticket. I just asked in the poll question was, do you support the Kennedy Shanahan ticket? And so far, it's got about 456 votes. It's open for 2 more days. And I'd love it if everybody would vote and please retweet this poll. I want to get as wide a sample as possible. But right now, she's doing good. 55% say yes, they do support the ticket. 30% say no. 15% are still undecided. They don't know enough about her yet. Again, they're waiting for her to flesh out her positions on issues and to hear her explain her thoughts on the world. So 15% are still trying to make up their minds. And, you know, a lot of people still haven't even seen the speech yet. In fact, I will post in the Nest and also down in the comments, I will post our live coverage. We did like 4 hours of live team coverage yesterday on Maverick News. We had some of our Kennedy 24 staffers and volunteers there with us on the panel, giving their thoughts, their reactions. It was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun. And I think you'll enjoy watching it that way, because you'll get to hear from his people, the Kennedy people, who traveled all the way out there to Oakland, who were so devoted they booked a plane ticket just so they could go to this event. They're very, very dedicated. And it's great and we just made a point to put comments up on the screen the whole time through the speech. I was going through the chat and highlighting comments from the audience, and the chat room was very busy. It was a big live stream. And it was so interesting just to watch the comments. When you watch the playback, and you need to hear her speech more than once, I would recommend listening at least twice to really digest it all. Because the things that she's talking about, the concepts that she's talking about, are very complex. You really need to listen to it a couple of times to fully grasp how smart this woman is. She's light years ahead of Bobby in some ways. You know, she understands things that he doesn't. He's not a tech wizard. He doesn't know much about AI. I don't even think he knows how to do email. You know, he's definitely not a tech savvy guy. So that's where she brings a hell of a lot to this ticket. It's a great balance to the ticket. I also believed that, you know, when we were debating over the last 2 weeks who we should pick, should it be someone who's more like, who's going to please people on the right? There was a lot of talk about, you know, Tulsi Gabbard or Mike Rowe or even Governor Ron DeSantis or Vivek Ramaswamy. You know, a lot of people wanted him to go right, and instead he went left. See, told you he wasn't going to do what you were expecting him to do. He went left, and now I'm sure that's why the DNC came out swinging yesterday, right after that event, right after he announced his VP, and she gave that speech. The DNC did a phone press conference with reporters where they tried to characterize Bobby as a, you know, spoiler for Trump and a right-wing extremist.
Yeah, that's
And
going to
then
be hard with Shannon as the VP to say that.
right. And then Team Trump, also Donald Trump put out a statement today on Truth Social And the PAC, the super PAC that backs him, put out a statement as well. And basically, they're attacking him as a left-wing fanatic. So they can't seem to make up their minds. Is he a right-wing extremist or a left-wing extremist? To me, that says they're scared. And what they're really scared of is that he's not an extremist. That's why they're trying to paint him that way. You know what I mean? He's not a right-wing extremist or a left-wing extremist. He is right down the center lane, where most people are, where most sane and reasonable people are, the silent majority, if you will. Most of the people who don't vote because they look at Biden and Trump as the extremes, really. Bobby's not that. And that is his appeal. And I think that Nicole is a perfect fit like that. And I want to go to Dylan because Dylan's also been waiting for a while. And I've been on the edge of my seat waiting to find out what he thinks about Nicole Shanahan. Dylan, why don't you unmute your mic and tell us your thoughts?
Well, thank you very much, Lori. I really appreciate it. As far as the Kennedy Shanahan ticket goes, I myself was first disappointed when I did hear about it. I was hoping for somebody a little bit more on the right, as some people were yesterday. But, as I listened to sort of what she had to say in regards to mental health, that really did strike a nerve with me. As I said yesterday, and as I said before, I've been struggling with my mental health the last year and a half now because of a traumatic event I had gone through back in November of 2022. And, in regards to the whole AI thing and just Kennedy priding himself in the campaign on young people and someone who can inspire young people, I think that's a big reason why he picked her. I think another big reason why he picked her is I think deep down he realized that if he did not get the vote of Gen Z and millennials, he was not going to win this election. And as much as I like people like Rand Paul and Tulsi Gabbard, I just don't see really them getting the young people's vote. I mean, Tulsi could probably do a little bit better than Rand Paul, but that's just kind of how I see it. But I am fully on board with the ticket. There are a few things that I don't see eye to eye with her, but I'm willing to look past that for the future of our country. And I made a post earlier in regards to what I had just said about the vote of Gen Z and millennials. And it seemed like a lot of people, for the most part, did agree with me in regards to that statement that I made. So I'm RFK all the way. I'm Kennedy Shanahan all the way. And I really do believe that this is the ticket for my generation's future. And it's just, I'm really excited because, yesterday they were saying the future starts now. The future does start now for me, for my generation, and for this country. And it will be a brighter future for the better. And I just want to tell everybody that, I'm fully on board with this. And I personally would like to maybe be on Maverick News at some point in the future. Perhaps me and, I don't know, maybe Holden, given that he's also a member of Gen Z, to sort of explain now that he has picked Shanahan, what impact this will have on younger voters come November. And
hey, that's a great idea. I would love to do a show with a couple of Gen Z Kennedy supporters, especially now that we know who the new vice presidential running mate's going to be, and she's young. If he makes it to the White House, she would be the youngest vice president we've ever had. What are you doing this Saturday night? Are you busy from 9 to 11 Eastern? Come join us on Strange Bedfellows.
Well, that'll definitely be interesting. Yeah, I think that's a wonderful idea. And I know a lot of people were disappointed yesterday by the pick, but my advice to everybody is, even if it's not somebody who you were hoping for or that is not your ideal choice. Let's just remember that Kennedy is the only one between Biden and Trump who's called out the federal agencies, who stood against globalism, who is exposing the truth behind these, foreign conflicts and how they are driving up inflation, and who truly wants to put a plan together to solve the southern border crisis. As a Texan, I could speak directly to that. I mean, it does affect my state. And I hope that when he does come to Texas with Ms. Shanahan, that I can meet him and explain to him what I hope to do for my community when I run for office one day as an independent. And I just wanted to reinvigorate my sense of commitment to this campaign, and that the future does truly start now. The future starts today. But anyways, that's all I really have to say, and I really appreciate you letting me speak.
But I think it's fascinating how well he's doing with young people. That took me by surprise. I thought he would do better with the boomers who remembered his dad and his uncle, because I've been to a lot of Bobby's speeches over the years, and usually it's a room full of gray-haired people. Seriously, that was always the bulk of the audience, were baby boomers, who were there because he was a Kennedy. Now it's so interesting to see this generation that's, 2 generations removed from his dad and his uncle, taking such an interest in him, and that he's actually performing worst with the boomers and best with people under 40. It's wild, but I love it because you guys are the future. And people like me, I'm Gen X, we're counting on you guys because you're going to be running the country when we're old and gray. So, we want you to save America. We need you to save this country because we're going to be old before you know it, right? Gen X is aging out. And speaking of old people, I want to read the statement that President Trump put out about Nicole Shanahan and RFK Jr. This is great. This is so remarkable. He tweeted this. Well, I guess he doesn't tweet. It was on Truth Social at 1:52 in the morning. Trump had a late night. I guess he was up worrying about RFK Jr. So here's what he said. He said, RFK Jr. is the most radical left candidate in the race by far. He's a big fan of the Green New Scam, he calls it, and other economy-killing disasters. I guess this would mean he is going to be taking votes from crooked Joe Biden, which would be a great service to America. His running mate, Nicole Shanahan, is even more liberal than him, if that's possible. Kennedy is a radical left Democrat and always will be. And then he puts 3 exclamation points after that, just to drive the point home. He says it's great for MAGA, but the communists will make it very hard for him to get on the ballot. Expect him and her to be indicted any day now, probably for environmental fraud, exclamation point. He is crooked Joe Biden's political opponent, not mine. I love that he is running, exclamation point. So talk about a typical New York left-handed compliment. Is that not a left-handed compliment? He comes out swinging, calling Bobby a radical far lefty. And by the end, he says, but he's taking votes from Biden, not me. So I love that he's in the race. More power to you, Bobby. I just love that. So I just brought in Billy Dees as my new co-host. I see you got your hand up, Billy. Hello. I wanted to get you on Maverick News yesterday, but schedules didn't align. And I've been dying to know what you think about Nicole Shanahan and the future of the campaign from here.
Well, thank you, Lori, and hello, everyone. I couldn't quite, get out of the work obligations yesterday in time. I can tell you that overall, I like the pick for a number of reasons. The obvious one being, you heard me mention before that the first rule in picking a vice presidential spot is do no harm. And this is someone who at least has some credentials for being very intelligent, very well spoken, and checks a lot of boxes. I know that this person is not somebody like Ron DeSantis or somebody like that might have gotten people a little bit more excited, but that's okay. And I'll tell you why, because here again, Lori has heard me say this before. The vice presidential pick will give you a little bump. I'm not exactly sure who Trump is going to pick. Let's say if it's Tulsi, he's going to get a big bump out of that, but eventually it levels off. And especially when we get into convention time, when the conventions and everything like that are going on, the focus is going to be on the top person, and that's just the way that it is. I don't know that the vice presidential pick has as much to do with the success of a candidate as it does to damage it. And this pick does no damage, so that's all good. One of the things that when they start getting a little bit more involved in the general election, she is, and both of them are going to have to speak to here again to appeal to a wide audience, are going to have to speak a little bit more firmly when it comes to crime and punishment. She mentioned rehabilitation in lieu of punishment during her speech yesterday. That's dangerous territory for the general election, especially when we have situations right now in New York, Chicago, Detroit, all these places where crime is extremely bad. I understand. I'm from Ohio, and when it comes to drug charges and things like that, I've actually made friends with a couple of really good judges who are involved in the crisis that we have here with the drug situation, addiction, and so on. And they all agree, for the most part, that when someone comes before the bench, it's their first offense with a drug charge, and the only person that they have harmed is themselves. It's much more preferential to get that person help than it is necessarily to throw them in jail and throw away the key. That really needs to be clarified, because all the judges that I'm talking about, and some of them have become my friends, you stab somebody and they're going to put you in jail for a long time. They're no nonsense people. And for some reason, Democrats in particular, and people like the Kennedys of more recent times, before John and his father, Ted Kennedy, and all that, they could never say bad criminals need to be put away. I mean, they would always get tongue tied. And I don't know why that is. We have a tolerance for violent crime in this country that I simply do not understand. We are obsessed with the rights of the accused. And to the point where we really don't really talk about the rights of someone who's been harmed. You don't get free health care like the accused does. You don't get free legal counsel like the accused does. You don't get in. There is no innate rights for the individual. So I really think, and here again, and whether my opinion about this aside, I can tell you when it comes to the general election, they're going to have to really work hard to clarify that message. Because that's not something that is going to play in what they call middle America. It's just not going to. Well, here
Yeah,
again,
I agree, and it makes about as much sense as the stupid policy that they have put into place in New York City. You've probably heard that Mayor Adams, here's a woke, dumb Democrat policy for you. They're giving away debit cards, right, to
yes,
these illegal migrants who have flooded the city. And those cards are topped up once a week with $350.
yeah,
And you can use it. It's like SNAP benefits. They can't legally give them SNAP benefits because only citizens are supposed to be able to get SNAP benefits. So it's funded by the city taxpayers, not the federal government. But it's like SNAP. It can be used for food, it can be used for baby supplies, things like that. But you know what kills me though, Billy? And this is what hurts every American is that people who are on food stamps, let's say an individual, the maximum benefit that you can get from food stamps as an individual is currently $291 a month
yeah,
is the maximum a month, which is that's not even a trip to the grocery store for some people these days. That's maybe if you really are careful, you could make that stretch half the month. How do you eat for the last 2 weeks of the month? Meanwhile, someone who's not even a citizen of this country and came here illegally is on getting free food to the tune of $350 a week on the taxpayer dime per individual.
yeah,
So if it's a family of migrants, they're making out pretty good with those debit cards. Um, Talk about a policy that's hard to sell to middle America.
Yeah. Well, what you're talking about, Lori, is common sense. And that's where I fear that a candidate who can address common sense, and for the most part, I feel that RFK Jr. does that well. He's going to have a common sense approach to this issue because everything that you're talking about, I don't know how many people I've heard say, and the conservative group of people now, Latinos, Blacks, all those individuals, that conservative base is starting to become much more diverse because here again, you have people who have been homeless, you have people who've been going hungry for years, right next door to what you're talking about, people who have just walked into the country and been given all this help. And these are communities, these are underserved communities that have been asking for help for a long time. And it just doesn't play well in middle America. I'm sorry, it just doesn't. It doesn't matter if that's my opinion or not. I'm telling you, it just here again from somebody who works in marketing every day, there are certain concepts that you have to stay consistent to. And this idea that we're losing our minds in regard to crime, people not following the law. Well, a good way to illustrate this, the way the Russians treated those shooters. If you look at some of the comments from on the posts, not only on social media, but if you go to the websites of the major news industries, I would almost call it a bloodlust. And I'm not saying that's a good idea either, but people were look what how the Russians treated these people. And there's a lot of things in those comments about how we'd have given them a credit card, we'd have let them out on bail, we'd have had the ACLU talking about how horribly they've been mistreated. And people are getting tired of that. It's you can only push that for so long, and I'm actually from an area for Ohio that has gotten a lot better. Oh, our area has gotten a lot better, but there was one time my hometown. I'm not exactly sure what the classification is for the different sizes of city, but in the class that we were in, we were the most dangerous place in the United States. And that is something that's scary. I mean, you go into the grocery store, you're walking out into the parking lot, you're looking over your shoulder, you're doing all these things. You got your keys in your hand. They always tell you keep your keys in your hand. Don't be looking for your keys. Don't be looking at your phone. And people are living in these situations, and when they see people that have committed horrendous crimes being coddled by the judicial system, it really doesn't play well. And I want to hear a candidate say something about what's normally termed law and order. Law and order has almost become like a fascist concept by some of these folks. It's something that they quote Hitler on. And it's really not that. What is good is having all the freedoms that we have in this society. If you're afraid to go to the park, so I think that has to be addressed. And if they can lighten that type of banter, I don't know what she means by that. She said it. If she can classify that in a way that comes across more, I would say, right of center, that would be good. I'll wrap this up by saying I think that the ticket needed somebody. If it was up to me, I would have picked somebody who was center right as opposed to center left, because RFK, rightly or wrongly, is already considered left of center. So I don't know how much more you would pick up by going with somebody that's left of center as well. And here again, I don't think it'd be huge anyway. I don't think it would make the difference between winning and losing the election. But that would have been a direction I would have gone in light of some of the things I've just said. So that's kind of my 2 cents on it. I believe it was a safe pick, and it needed to be a safe pick. I know a lot of RFK supporters were really wanting to go for swinging for the fence, and I think that's
like Jesse Ventura.
yeah, that would have been
like
swinging
me.
for the fence.
Yep.
And fortunately, like I said, because you could only expect so much good in return, it would have been high risk, low reward. That's not how you want to gamble. So that's kind of this is a low risk, low reward pick, and that's what you want to. That's what you want. That's what you want. It doesn't sound good, but it is because a high risk, low reward means that you're only going to win so much anyway, and the high risk is it could damage your brand. And I really think that Aaron Rodgers or Jesse Ventura, and I know all the people are going to come at me, all the credentials that Jesse Ventura has. And here again, as someone who comes from marketing and branding, the reality of his resume is almost a secondary. In terms of branding, it would have really branded this ticket as very animated. And a lot of people feel that way about RFK anyway. Is he a serious candidate? You don't want a
Right.
quarterback in there with somebody you have to convince you have a serious candidate, especially one like Aaron Rodgers, who said all kinds of crazy, goofy stuff over the years. Even in the world of football, he has. So I think this was a safe bet, and that was probably the way to go.
Yeah, I think it was a very wise pick, but there are some things that she's going to have to explain.
Yep.
Things that we have questions about. For example, you're talking about the wokeness that is, influencing our criminal justice system. And unfortunately, Nicole seems to have a background in a lot of that. And she also donated money, I think, to Gascon, the DA out in, I think it was San Francisco, who resigned or was forced out of office basically because he was letting all these violent criminals out on the streets. And there's a George Soros connection there. I believe that she has donated to candidates that his foundation backs for that are ruining DA's offices across the country. So that's one of my concerns with her, and I want to hear her explain that.
Yeah, can I say something real quick? I'm also thinking like she could sort of have the best of both worlds. Like if she has a nuanced take that's sort of reasonable, she could call out Soros's name while still saying that although she does support certain changes, like what Bobby said, in terms of certain people getting out of prison, and having like drug rehab and stuff like that, and having a chance to improve their life. She could, promote that type of stuff while still being against no cash bail and defunding the police and all of that ridiculous stuff. So that way she could have the best of both worlds. And especially if she verbatim like calls out George Soros by name, a lot of those right wing or conservative voters will be like, whoa, she's pretty based. No way, she's down with any of that if she's saying all of that.
So real quick, I did have a couple of comments before I get into before I have to take off to go to work. I think that a lot of what you guys are saying in terms of Nicole Shanahan sounding sincere, I actually agree, and that's part of what alarms me. When I look at her investments into companies like Carbon Royalty Corp, and there's another one that's directly attached to the biotech sector, and they're talking about precision medicine. I live in the Silicon Valley, formerly known as the Bay Area. And I've watched the tech sector grow, and I've watched transitions take place for over 40 years. I've been in technical recruiting. I've worked for a couple of startups in business development and in retention. So I have an understanding of the landscape, of the monopolies, of the relationships, of the nepotism, of the visa abuse, and on and on. And so when I look at her investments, those concern me much more than the superficial relationships that she may or may not have had. Although I don't think that we can discount, I don't think we can dismiss the relationships that come out of her time spent married to someone, her philanthropy, where she spent her time. You have to understand the precision medicine that she's talking about. There's a connection there to the CRISPR technology that everybody's so concerned with when it comes to the mRNA platform. I mean, all of these different dots connect. And so if she's invested in lowering carbon emissions, heavily invested, and she's on the board, and if she's talking about precision medicine, we have to look under the hood much deeper than we are. And I think one of the things that concerns me the most is that we're talking about these elections as if we don't have problems with the elections themselves, with the proprietary software that exists, the mail-in ballots, and everything else. And I'll end by saying this. One of the things that I did when Kennedy decided that he was going to announce for presidency, his campaign for presidency, for president, I was an avid supporter of him during COVID. I worked for a for a nonprofit organization directly involved in pushing back against the legislation taking place in California, a voice for choice advocacy, where a lot of my research was suppressed. I worked with people who were involved in the local California chapter, so I'm not naive when it comes to his positions. I've supported him in many ways and agree with him in many ways. However, I do think that he has ignored the data fraud, and when it came to elections themselves, I looked up to see if I could find anything with him calling out the rigging that took place in the Democratic primaries in 2016, and I couldn't find it. And anybody who was paying attention to the Democratic primaries understood the rigging took place. Even Elizabeth Warren, Donna Brazile, they had to go public and admit it. That's why Tulsi Gabbard left the DNC, and so, you know, for him to not have spoken up and then to have endorsed Hillary Clinton, that was a major red flag. And with Tulsi Gabbard, I went to one of her town halls in 2020. People are elevating her in this space and elsewhere. But I'll tell you another thing. She was absent during COVID at the peak. She did not speak up against Hawaii, which is one of the most authoritarian type of policy states in the entire union. When we were at the height of COVID, she was absent. She was late to the conversation when she finally started addressing it. And she was also late to the conversation with her own brothers and sisters in the military when they were being forced to take injections.
That is very true.
And so, you know, when people start saying that this is another Tulsi Gabbard, I'm like, okay, well, we have to try to take at face value what people are saying, but we have to also be careful that we don't say things like, I trust this person, I trust that person. Right now, I don't trust any political figure, any organization, any political party. They haven't earned the trust. And even the ones that are doing really good, I never offer my blind support. So all I'm going to say is with Nicole Shanahan, I want to believe that she has the best of intentions. And I thought she came across as sincere. But the question that I have is, what is she sincere about?
Right.
I'll leave it at that.
Yeah. Best advice ever is never worship a politician. Or as Bob Dylan wrote, don't follow leaders, watch a parking meters. Never worship a politician. They will always let you down. But there are some I like. You know, I'm very skeptical about politicians. My God, I've been covering news and politics. I started out when Ronald Reagan was president. That's how old I am. Yeah, and the first presidential race I covered was 1988. George H.W. Bush was the first president that I ever interviewed. So I've been there and done that, and I'm very jaded. I'm not going to lie. And I'll say that because I know Bobby somewhat, and because I was trying to get him to run 20 years ago, because I really thought that he was the best choice for America's future, that hasn't changed. In fact, I'm more convinced than ever that he's the best man for the job. And that's why I'm working so hard for him. I don't usually throw my lot in with politicians. I haven't been this enthusiastic publicly about any politician or privately since Ron Paul. I was part of the Ron Paul revolution in 2008 and 2012. I've been a libertarian for 30 years. I did, you know, Nicole Shanahan wasn't even, well, she was a kid when I left the Democratic Party. I left the Democratic Party in 1996. The Clintons ran me out. I thought they ruined the Democratic Party. They turned it into the party of corporate America and the party of war. And yeah, I had a belly full 30 years ago. So it just took Bobby a lot longer to wake up and to realize that. And I, too, was disappointed when he endorsed Hillary Clinton 3 times. He endorsed her for the Senate seat in 2000, endorsed her for president in 2008, and again, of course, in 2016. And he endorsed Barack Obama, which I disagreed with, too. So we don't always agree on stuff, but that's okay. I still feel that he's the best choice for the country, and I can forgive him his mistakes because we all make mistakes. You know what my biggest political mistake was? I voted for Bill Clinton in 1992. I'm such an idiot. I should have voted for Ross Perot. I'm still kicking myself that I didn't vote for Ross Perot in 1992. But I guess some people would argue that a vote for Ross Perot was a vote for Bill Clinton in 1992, right? because he was the spoiler who spoiled the election for George Bush and helped to make Clinton the president of the United States. So I want to go to Justin next. Justin's been waiting for quite a while. Hello, Justin. How are you? Great to have you here in the space. Curious to get your thoughts on Nicole Shanahan. What did you think?
Hey, Lori. Yeah, thanks for having me. For anybody who doesn't know, my name is Justin Jaden. I am an independent candidate actually for the Ohio House of Representatives, District 99. So, Billy, you're living in an area of Ohio that's improving and up and coming, and I live in a part of Ohio that is quite the opposite. So that's part of the reason why I'm running as an independent candidate. And, it was, as independents are, skeptical of everybody. And it's kind of at this point, you're window shopping and RFK's campaign. It's like you walk by, you get a glance, and then you take a full look at it. And then the next time you go by, your head's fully turned. Well, maybe at some point next week, my head will be fully pressed against the glass. But right now it's certainly got me interested. And the Shanahan pick, I think, makes a lot of sense. I think Billy made a great point in that it was safe, but with a lot of upside. I spoke on Holden Coletta's space kind of immediately after the announcement, and said, it may not have moved the needle on public opinion very much, but it probably moved the needle as far as raising the ceiling of capabilities of fundraising for the campaign. Because I think there's going to come a time with any candidate, whether it's RFK, whether it's anybody else who's hasn't announced yet, or somebody, you have to think that the conditions are prime, that somebody will catch critical mass at some point, and they'll be off to the races. And I think what Nicole provides is connections into Silicon Valley for people who are ready and willing to start hedging their bets against the duopoly. I was sitting like 2 hours after her speech because it was, I went to the University of Akron School of Law where I graduated certificate in trial advocacy. And I was sitting a couple hours about to go get groceries, and it hit me what was kind of not bugging me, but was ringing in my head about her speech. And it hit me that they're starting an opening statement right now. And by having two attorneys right now, having Bobby and having Nicole paired up as two attorneys, they're starting to announce basically, we're suing the duopoly. We're going to present this case against the duopoly to the rest of Americans during this campaign. And I think it's probably the best winning strategy they have. And if you look at the stages of trials, what Bobby was essentially doing up to yesterday was voir direing the jury, aka meeting all of the Americans, figuring out what a winning message is, what the important things are.
What a perfect analogy. Absolutely perfect analogy. That was their opening statement as a trial lawyer team.
Yeah,
I love it.
And I really think that it's only just begun, because just like Citizen pointed out, just like Billy pointed out, just like everybody's going to point out, there's a lot of still unknowns about Nicole. So during an opening statement, that's your opportunity to present, hey, this is the case we are going to show. So I think probably over the next 2 months, we're going to really get to know Nicole Shanahan. We're really going to get to know what she's going to be able to provide in addition to Bobby. And in this time, hopefully, we're going to be hearing additions to the team that are going to assuage the center rights that we're looking for, a Tulsi or a Jesse Ventura or, DeSantis by some long shot, But after that, after they presented, hey, this is what we're going to prove to you during the summertime, during the hardcore campaign months, if they're able to stay on message, and that's a big if, that's the winning strategy of here are the facts. In lieu of their shouts of conspiracy theories, here's the evidence. In lieu of their shouts of, crackpot, whatever, here is our evidence. They aren't giving you anything. And then the final month, you're going to have your closing statement of saying, hey, we showed you during this campaign what we are planning to do and why. And they have done nothing. And that, I think, is a possible, somebody asked me today, does Bobby have a chance? And I was like, he's got a puncher's chance. He's got a, he's got a Mike Tyson versus Jake Paul chance right now. You know, the George Foreman fight when he was 50 something years old, knocking out that kid. You know, a puncher can punch. There's the ingredients here, and it's going to be really dependent upon the next couple months of building credibility, recognizing the, you know, when in trial advocacy you say eating the shit, your bad facts, recognizing them, accepting them, and moving on from them, and not allowing the message to get branded back onto that continually. So these next couple months are going to be really important, I think, as far as building credibility, and recognizing and being vulnerable to the audience about, you know, and that's what something was really impressive about her speech yesterday, was how vulnerable she was. And if you can continue that, you're gonna win Americans over. And, you know, like I continue to say, the ingredients are there. I wasn't discouraged. Just like Billy said, this was a high upside, pretty low risk pick. Still hoping that maybe Matthew McConaughey can get involved somehow too. So that's all I gotta say.
Ah, cool. I'd love to see Matthew McConaughey involved with our campaign.
Hey,
I'm an
Lori,
Austin,
can I just say
Texas
one thing
girl.
to can I just say one thing to Justin real quick?
Sure.
Justin, I want to thank you. I know the area that you're running in Ohio, and you're right, it does need help. I'm from the Akron Canton area. Our area is not perfect, but it has improved a lot. I know you went to school in Akron, great law program there. So you got a good background, and I wish you the best, my friend.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Yeah, and I was in Akron during all the construction, and I tried to stay as long as I could to see the aftermath in downtown, but COVID hit, and had an opportunity to move out to Lake Erie instead, and couldn't pass it up. And really growing to learn just the abject kind of treatment that these counties are getting, and because of just absolutely abhorrent representation. And that's because of the two-party system of people caring more about working inside the party than they do about bringing representation to the people. So yeah, I really do appreciate it. Anybody interested, check out jadenforohio.com. Jaden is spelled TJADEN. Thanks again.
Thanks, Justin. Pleasure having you here, and good luck with your race. I know how hard it is to run as an independent, but we need a lot more of you. So thank you for the sacrifice you're making to run for public office. I know that it's so much work, and you don't get much sleep or time with your family, not enough, because you're working for the people. So thank you very much. And I want to go to Jamie next. How you doing, Jamie? Talk to me.
Hey, Lori, how you doing?
Doing great, doing great. I want to know your thoughts on Nicole Shanahan.
Yeah, I went to bed on it, like you said, and I'm rooting and wishing to be wrong, but I do think that in the end I woke up feeling like this was the wrong choice, but I do applaud it. You know, I think it was courageous of him. I think he did the right thing to give an opportunity. I think, but I think that I think that for what they said that they wanted to accomplish, they could have done that from almost from like a private organization position, a nonprofit, and accomplished a lot of what they're trying to do as far as advocating for health, technology, advancements, and in that way they wouldn't even have the government bureaucracy slowing them down. They may have even been able to accelerate some of those plans even more. But I kind of felt like, I was looking to see what was happening, and I listened to a lot of the responses, and I from people after the announcement, and I heard a lot of conservatives feeling almost kind of let down, like they were looking for a reason to support this campaign. They like Bobby, they want a different choice than Trump, but then, feeling very unsure about Shanahan. So I kind of look at things as more as like percentages. Was did this chance to win the election increase or decrease based on percentage? I feel like it didn't increase. It's still a lot of unknowns. As I'm listening to her speak, and I always, whenever I hear Bobby, I just get so hopeful and so excited that like I finally have somebody who understands unity and trying to get who understands history and how and what needs to be done going forward. It brings out the believer in me again, And then when I heard her speak, I'm like, wow, she's a mother, she's an accomplished business person, she's intelligent, like, she's the way they'd have to spin this is, I'm not a politician. That's what change. That's how change is going to happen because we're not politicians. So I get they're totally in. Like I got their message. I wasn't sure which direction he was going. I am not confused about how they plan to win. They're all in with technology innovation, focusing on health and disparity of the middle class, and so I love it. But I always come back to put my emotions aside, and I'm like, how are you going to win first? They said that they're going after the young, so, and I can see she's under 40. He said that the young and non-voting is crucial, but I also don't think that unless, again, this is the all-in way, is that they have to get every younger voter under 45, non-voter, tech, young professionals. They have to come out and vote, or it's not going to be a chance. Because in my mind, if I'm being strategic and I'm trying to help the campaign get to their goals, they have to take from a base. And again, there's a clear, the way you look at the border, Lori, the way you looked at and described the prepaid cards and for the illegals and stuff, that's a Democratic viewpoint. That's not Bobby. That's not the Republicans. There's not even a question of whether or not you would think about voting for Bobby if you had those beliefs. So you're not pulling from there. So you have to pull from your competitor, the guy, the party that's in your way that you need to pull from to have a chance, and that's the Trump side. And I don't think adding her takes away from that Trump side. Now, I talked the other day about DeSantis being an ideal VP because he's not respected by Trump, but he is respected by the Republicans and conservatives. And he takes away from the Trump base that gives them somebody who's a proven governor, has already campaigned, he's out there, his state's doing well. Tulsi would have been another one that could have done it, but I thought that DeSantis gave him the best probabilities. I think that he could have given her a cabinet position and still added value as a VP that would have gave him a more political advantage than, to advance some of these goals. And think about it, even on the other side of it, on Biden's side, Kamala Harris is widely viewed as irrelevant, a non-factor in the vice presidential comparison to taking over the presidency. Not a lot of confidence. Even her walking into a vice presidential debate could have the confidence of, hey, listen, you can say what you want about me, but I was the vice president for 4 years. You could put almost anybody as a VP candidate paired with Bobby that would, make Harris have a difficult time up there. We already don't have confidence there.
Well, yeah, one thing you can sure say about Nicole Shanahan is she's already better than Harris, Pence, Joe Biden when he was vice president, and certainly better than Dick Cheney. Right there, she's got an advantage on our last 4 VPs.
But as far as electability, even if you look at like Dick Cheney, he had the experience. He was able to balance the things that young Bush W didn't have, and that was appealing to the base. It's not about necessarily effectiveness or betterness. It's about how do you get elected? And listen, I want Bobby to win, but when I look at the aftermath of it, I think that there's the percentages got lower for me. Again, I hope I'm wrong. Because he certainly went, no question, a completely different direction. So there's no way you can confuse him with the other two sides as far as what you might vote for. So maybe that will be what he evokes in when he gets an opportunity to move forward in campaigns, because obviously when he speaks he's transformative, but I
I'm
guess I'm
sorry
left.
to, I am so sorry to cut you off, Jamie, but we are running out of time. I actually have to wrap this space up in 9 minutes. As we move forward, I'm going to ask you to try and limit your comments to about 2 minutes. As I move on I want to go to Clive next, because Clive is a DeSantis, or was a DeSantis voter, still a DeSantis supporter. And, I haven't heard much today from our Kennedy fans or supporters on the right. I think they were so stunned by the pick of Nicole Shanahan that they kind of needed 24 hours to process it and decide how they feel about it. And I know some of them, walked out furious saying, I'm out. I can't do this. I can't support her. So really curious to hear your thoughts, Clive. What do you think?
Hey, Lori, thanks for having me up. Appreciate it. So, what I will say is that on the DeSantis side of the camp, well, first up, as a broad overview, the RFK coalition, I think it's a very broad base. It includes Democrats, Libertarians, Never Trumpers, some loose MAGA folks, and a lot of DeSantis folks who are looking at RFK. So when he made the selection that he did, the problem is that a lot of people, particularly on the DeSantis and the Libertarian side, had some questions about the policies, and they wanted to see more. And they were hoping he would select someone who would be more of a stabilizing force underneath the ticket. So that's why a lot of them were enamored, maybe a Rand Paul. Tulsi would have been fantastic for them. And when they didn't get that, they felt let down. Okay, they were a little bit disappointed. So things happen. However, despite that, there are opportunities. Things happen and there are opportunities. So I've always made the contention that um, I think from a policy standpoint, because a lot of the DeSantis and Libertarians they look at policy a lot and they look at the policy on the website and they think that there needs to be a little bit more clarity around his policies. And I think from a messaging standpoint, he could send a very bold signal. And he started down this path a little bit in some of the things that he's talked about. If he's clear, say, hey, listen, I'm going to govern and I'm going to take some of the policies that made this country strong, that made the American family strong, and look to my uncle JFK. I think that would send a lot of shockwaves because JFK, if you look at him today, he's a classical Democrat and he would be like the Republican Party today. So those policies are fantastic when you're talking about the fiscal responsibility, spending out of budget, and we still did things like education, but within fiscal constraints. We did things like NASA under him within fiscal constraints, having a vision for the country. So I think those would help highlight if you were to do that, send signals around what kind of policy prescription he'd be looking at in terms of what his governance would look like. So that would help immensely, I think. And I think a lot of clarity around some of the policies that he has. Like, for example, one of the things he wants to do is, float bonds at government percent, 3% for first-time homeowners. Difficult for people to swallow because people feel like you're increasing the debt. But if you were to say, hey, listen, some of the policies we currently have in the Department of Housing is redundant and outdated, he can retire those and then float this new policy. Then it's more acceptable. That way it's budget neutral. So there's a lot of things he can do from a foreign policy standpoint. He talks about the border from a humanitarian crisis and a security issue. I think it's both. So the way he can thread that needle, he can say, okay, we'll secure the border. And as for these people coming from these other countries, we can have support for the Monroe Doctrine and have trade with our friends instead of having trade with our adversaries in China. So there's a lot of things he can do. He just needs to craft the policies to me that are more consistent with his uncle. And I think that would put a lot of people at ease. And I think that would have people reassess him more because then they would realize, okay, the policies are coming from at the head of the ticket as opposed to the bottom of the ticket. And I think that's how he can kind of stabilize this situation. Because at the end of the day, I agree with Jamie. He's got to get that other contingency to win. He's got to get those DeSantis folks. He's got to get those traditional classical Democrats vote and those boomers. And he's got to get those libertarians, some of those people who are upset and disenfranchised with a two-party duopoly and the corporatism. And there's a fantastic opportunity for him to still do that. And I landed there.
Great comments, Clive. And I know that some of his supporters on the right, the conservatives, the libertarians, the Republicans, were taken aback by the choice of Nicole Shanahan yesterday. But I did want to throw this story out there before I close up tonight. At Maverick News, we did live team coverage yesterday, and our audience tends to be very conservative, very libertarian, and a lot of MAGA. And, of course, at first they did not want to like her. They were very distrustful of her. And, our channel was born out of the Freedom Convoy. That's how we started. We are basically, Rick Walker, my co-host, is up in Canada. He started that channel to broadcast the Freedom Convoy 24/7 around the clock from Ottawa when all the truckers went there to protest vaccine mandates. So that gives you an idea of the mindset of our audience, right? But by the end of her speech, she hit all the things that they care about. And she won them over, most of them. So if she can win over an audience of tough critics like the ones we have at Maverick News, I truly believe that she's going to grow on conservatives and Republicans out there. So fear not, my friends. I know some of you have pulled away. Some of you are still trying to figure her out. You want to learn more. But that's what this space was all about tonight. I was reading in the comments below, some folks were like, well, isn't this supposed to be a space where we're cheerleading our candidate and everything he does is right and we're just supposed to back him no matter what? Well, no. I mean, I want to hear honest opinions out there. I want to hear a wide range of opinions. That's what this podcast was all about tonight. The good, the bad, the uncertainty, initial impressions. As was just stated earlier, this was kind of an opening argument. Nicole was making her opening argument to the American people, and you are the jury. So I wanted to get honest opinions here in this space. That's what I'm always interested in. And I don't want you to feel like that you have to hold back anything or mask your true feelings when you come in here to talk to me anyway. Some other spaces might be run differently, might be more like cheerleading spaces for the campaign. But me, I'm a journalist, so I'm more interested in hearing all sides of the story. So with that, I'm going to close out for the night because I've got to be somewhere in a few minutes. I got to run. But this was a lot of fun and really interesting. And I loved all the perspectives that you guys brought to the table. And we'll do this again soon. I'm not sure what we'll talk about next week, but there's always something interesting happening on this campaign. So there'll be more to talk about. And we'll see what Nicole Shanahan shows us in the weeks and months ahead. I'm really curious to find out more about this lady. I must say my first impression was wow. Wow. I really, really like her a lot. And I can see why Bobby chose her. And I think she's going to surprise a lot of people. So thank you so much for listening. Thanks to everybody who spoke on the panel. And we'll see you next time. Have a great night.
This has been a Maverick Multimedia production.